The polished chrome of his bumper reflected the cheap neon of the motel sign, a cruel joke. I watched him get out, his expensive suit a dark stain on the gravel lot. He wasn't looking for my room. He was looking for room 114. Every long-haul route has a rhythm. A pulse. You learn it like you learn the growl of your own engine, the specific whine of the turbo spooling up on a cold morning in Wyoming when the air is thin and sharp enough to cut glass. It's more than just miles and hours. It's a feeling. The lonely drone of I-40 through the Texas Panhandle at 3 in the morning, where the world shrinks to just your headlights and the next mile marker, and you feel like the last man on earth. The frantic, staccato heartbeat of the I-5 corridor heading into LA, a river of red taillights and frayed nerves, where every driver is an enemy and patience is a liability. The slow, steady, patient climb of the Rockies on I-70, where the engine labors and you can feel the altitude in your own lungs, a heaviness that makes you feel small against the sheer size of the mountains. You learn the personality of the asphalt itself, the jarring thump-thump of concrete slabs in Illinois, the smooth, silent blacktop of a freshly paved stretch in Arizona. For about 6 months, my rhythm had a name, Sarah. And it happened every Wednesday, just outside Redwood Creek, Texas, a town that felt like it had been forgotten by the rest of the state, a place that smelled of dust and regret. I had a regular run, hauling processed cotton from a huge gin in Lubbock up to a textile plant in Kansas City. It was a good gig, the kind of man with 2 million miles under his belt settles into like a worn-in armchair. Predictable. Paid on time. The dispatcher, a fella named Henderson with a voice like gravel in a coffee can, left me alone as long as the load arrived when it was supposed to. It was the kind of steady work that lets a man get lost in his own head, which is sometimes the only peace you can find out here. Your thoughts become a landscape of their own, vast and empty, populated by ghosts of past runs and past lives. And that route, it put me on a perfect schedule to be pulling into the Lone Star Inn right around 2 in the afternoon every Wednesday, like clockwork. The Lone Star Inn wasn't much. It was a place that had given up trying to be anything more than a place to stop. A U-shaped collection of faded yellow doors facing a cracked concrete pool that was permanently out of season, filled with greenish water, a slurry of dead leaves, and the occasional beer can glinting from the bottom like a lost treasure. The sign out front had a big neon star with 2 points burned out, so at night it just blinked lone ARINN into the humid darkness, a sad, stuttering beacon for the lost and the tired. It was the kind of place where the ice machine was always broken and hummed with a sound of profound mechanical despair, and the towels felt like they'd been washed with gravel and then dried with a blowtorch. But the anonymity was as thick as the summer air. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared who you were, what you were hauling, or what you were running from. The other guests, when you saw them, were shadows, a construction worker covered in drywall dust, a woman with a crying baby and a black eye, another trucker like me looking for 8 hours of quiet. For a man in my line of work, that's a 5-star review. Privacy is a currency out on the road, more valuable than cash sometimes. It's the wall you build around yourself to keep the world from getting its hooks in too deep. The first time I met her, it was pure chance. A fluke. I'd pulled in, tired after fighting a nasty crosswind all the way from Amarillo that had me gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. I was checking in, smelling of diesel and sweat, and she was at the counter ahead of me, arguing quietly with the desk clerk. Her car, a fancy silver Lexus that was so clean it looked like it had just been driven off a showroom floor, had a flat. The spare was missing, and her husband wasn't answering his phone. She was flustered, her voice tight with a frustration that seemed bigger than just a flat tire. It was the frustration of someone whose perfectly ordered world had suddenly developed a crack. She looked out of place, like a diamond dropped in a puddle of motor oil. I heard the clerk, a skinny kid with more acne than ambition, tell her there were no mechanics in town who'd come out for a roadside call after 5. Redwood Creek rolled up its sidewalks at dusk. I can change a tire, I heard myself say. The words were out before I'd even thought about it. It was an impulse I usually keep to myself. Getting involved is a rookie mistake, the first chapter in a book of things that can go wrong on the road. You help a guy with a breakdown, next thing you know you're a witness to something you shouldn't have seen. You give a hitchhiker a ride, you spend the next 50 miles wondering if he's got a knife. You learn to be an island. She turned, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, gray-green and turbulent, sized me up in a single, sweeping glance. My worn jeans, my company ball cap pushed back on my head, the grease under my fingernails that never quite washes out no matter how hard you scrub. I expected suspicion, a polite refusal, a quick retreat to the safety of her car to call someone else. Instead, she just looked tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that has nothing to do with lack of sleep. "You would?" she asked, her voice softer now, the sharp edge of frustration worn away. "It's what you do when you see someone stranded," I said, shrugging. It was a half-truth. It's what my old man taught me to do. It wasn't always what I did. But something in her face reminded me of a painting I saw once, of a woman looking out a window, waiting for a ship that was never coming home. So I changed the tire on her Lexus in the dying Texas light, the heavy-duty jack from my rig looking like a piece of industrial machinery next to her delicate car. The lug nuts were on so tight I had to put my whole body into the wrench. She stood there, watching me, her arms crossed over her chest. The silence was thick for a few minutes, filled only with the groan of metal and the distant hum of the highway. Then she asked me my name. I told her. She told me hers. Sarah. When I finished, sweating and smudged with brake dust, she tried to give me money. A crisp $100 bill, pulled from a wallet that probably cost more than my boots. I refused, shaking my head. It felt wrong to take money for it. It would have turned the act into a transaction, and it felt like something more than that. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee, then," she insisted, her voice firm. "The diner across the street can't be that bad." It was. The coffee was terrible, thin and bitter, tasting like it had been sitting on the burner since noon. But we sat in a worn vinyl booth with a rip in the seat patched with duct tape, and for an hour, we talked. Or rather, she talked. She unspooled the story of her day, her life, in small, careful pieces, like she was testing the weight of each word before she let it go. The garden club meeting, the charity luncheon, the constant, unspoken pressure to be perfect, to be Mrs. Richard Connolly. It was like listening to someone describe a beautiful, gilded cage from the inside. I mostly just listened. Listening is half my job. You listen to the engine for any change in pitch that signals trouble. You listen to the dispatcher for changes in routing. You listen to the silence of an empty road for what it might be hiding. Listening to her felt just as important. When we left, the sky bruised with purple and orange, she paused by my truck, the massive grille towering over her. "I drive through here sometimes," she said, not quite looking at me, tracing a pattern on the dusty fender of her car with one perfectly manicured finger. "On Wednesdays." It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. Me too. The next Wednesday, I pulled in and I saw it. The silver Lexus, parked in the back of the lot, away from the office, tucked into the corner like a secret. It felt like a dare. A silent invitation. My heart gave a little kick. I got my room 112, and a few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. And that's how the rhythm started. I'd check in, always asking for room 112. The girl at the desk, a teenager with tired eyes, blue-streaked hair, and a name tag that said Lexi, stopped asking for my ID after the third week. She had a kind of weary intelligence, like she'd seen every sad story the highway had to offer before she'd even turned 20. She'd seen the salesmen with their fake wedding rings, the families running from debt, the lovers meeting in secret. Our story was just another chapter in the motel's sordid history. She'd just slide the key across the counter, the one with the big plastic diamond tag that was chipped on one side, and say, "Drive safe, Sam." Sometimes she'd add, "She's already here," with a nod toward the back of the lot, her eyes never leaving the dog-eared paperback she was always reading. She never judged. She was part of the anonymity, the silent keeper of the Lone Star's many secrets. Room 112 was always the same. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and the cheap pine cleaner they used to try and cover it up, a combination that stung the back of your throat. The air conditioner rattled like a box of bolts, but it worked, turning the blistering Texas heat into a manageable, artificial chill. I'd toss my duffel on the floor, pull a lukewarm soda from the buzzing mini fridge, and sit in the hard plastic chair by the window to wait. The view was always the same, the cracked pool, the highway beyond, and the endless Texas sky. And then, around 2:30, her car would appear. That silver Lexus, always clean enough to eat off of. It looked so out of place in that dusty lot, parked between my Freightliner and some rusted-out pickup with a mismatched fender. She'd park in the back, far from the office, and walk quick and quiet to my door, head down, clutching her purse like a shield, as if she was afraid the sky itself was watching her. "Sarah." She was a Texas housewife, the kind you see in magazines or on local TV commercials for luxury car dealerships. Blonde hair always perfect, tasteful jewelry, clothes that probably cost more than my weekly fuel bill. But the moment that motel room door clicked shut behind her, a transformation would happen. The first thing she always did was lean her forehead against the cool wood of the door, close her eyes, and take a single, deep, shuddering breath, like a diver coming up for air after being down too long. It was the exhalation of a woman shedding a heavy costume. Then she'd turn to me, and the smile that would spread across her face, it wasn't the polite, brittle smile she wore out in the world. This one was real. It reached her eyes and made them shine, chasing the storm clouds away for a little while. "Hey, trucker," she'd say, her voice a soft Texas drawl that was music after a day of nothing but talk radio and dispatch chatter. "Hey, yourself," I'd answer from my chair. She'd kick off her expensive heels with a sigh of relief, peel off the blazer or the cashmere cardigan, and suddenly she was just Sarah. Not Mrs. Richard Connolly. She'd sit on the edge of the stiff, questionable bedspread, tucking her feet up under her, and tell me about her week. Mundane things, mostly. The argument at the garden club over what kind of roses to plant at the town entrance. What her husband, Richard, had said about the stock market. A new recipe she tried that was a disaster. It was like she was purging the details of a life that didn't fit her, leaving them on the stained carpet of room 112 so she wouldn't have to carry them back home. We never talked about love. We never made plans. It was an arrangement, an unspoken agreement born of two different kinds of loneliness. Mine was the wide open, echoing kind that comes from spending 20 years and 2 million miles staring at white lines on black asphalt. A loneliness that feels vast as the Montana sky, so big you can lose yourself in it. Hers was the closed-in, suffocating kind that comes from a big empty house and a husband who saw her as another one of his assets, like his golf clubs or his stock portfolio. Two solitudes, touching for a few hours in the middle of nowhere. Richard was in oil, of course. This was Texas. According to Sarah, he was a big deal in Redwood Creek. A pillar of the community. Chairman of this, board member of that. His picture was in the local paper every other week, shaking hands with the mayor, dedicating a new park bench. She spoke of him with a strange mix of resentment and learned loyalty. He had a temper she only hinted at, a controlling streak she described with a sad, dismissive wave of her hand. "He likes his things just so," she'd say. "The cars have to be clean, the house has to be perfect. The schedule has to be capped." Then she'd add, her voice dropping to a whisper, "And I'm one of his things." One time she told me he'd thrown a crystal glass against the fireplace, a wedding gift, because she'd been 10 minutes late for a dinner party. She told it like a funny story, a little anecdote about her husband's peculiarities, but her hands were trembling in her lap and she couldn't meet my eyes. I never pushed for details. It wasn't my place. My job was to be the parenthesis in her life. The space between the words where she could be someone else for a few hours. I was the secret she kept. And she was the port in a storm I didn't even know I was sailing through. She was a reason to look forward to Wednesday, a bright spot in the endless monotony of the road. We'd drink the terrible coffee I'd make in the room's little machine, which always sounded like it was about to explode. Sometimes she'd bring sandwiches, wrapped in wax paper. Tuna salad on white bread, crusts cut off. It felt so domestic, so strangely normal in that sordid little room, that it was almost painful. It was a glimpse of a life I'd once tried to have and failed at spectacularly. We'd talk for hours. I'd tell her about the road. About the time I saw the northern lights stretch across the whole sky in Montana, looking like a green ghost dancing over the mountains. It was so bright it lit up the inside of my cab. About a little diner in Wyoming that served a steak the size of a hubcap, and the waitress, a tough old bird named Flo, called everyone honey and seemed to know their life story after taking their order. I never told her the bad stuff. The wrecks I'd seen, the twisted metal and the bodies under sheets. The fights. The friend I had, Jimmy Callahan, who went out for a load of lumber in Oregon 10 years ago and just vanished. His rig was found empty on a forgotten logging road a week later. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat, a half-eaten apple on the dash. No signs of a struggle. He was just gone. One day he was cussing about fuel prices on the CB, the next he was a ghost story other truckers told. Some ghosts you don't share. You just give them a seat in the cab and keep driving. Sometimes, when the afternoon light slanted through the dusty window, she'd trace the old, faded scar on my jaw with her fingertip. It ran from just below my ear down to the point of my chin, a pale white line against my sun-weathered skin. "You've lived a life, Sam," she'd whisper, her touch so gentle it was almost not there. "Just a lot of miles, Sarah. That's all." It was a lie, of course. Those miles wear grooves in you, inside and out. The scar was from a bar in Laredo, nearly 15 years back. I was younger, dumber. A disagreement over a game of pool and a woman who wasn't worth the trouble for either one of us. It was a stupid, pointless fight that started with a shove and ended with the jagged edge of a broken beer bottle and a trip to a border town clinic where a tired doctor stitched me up without any anesthetic. It was a permanent reminder that trouble has a way of finding you, even when you're just trying to have a quiet beer. And Sarah, I knew from the first Wednesday, she was trouble. The best and worst kind. The kind that makes you feel alive right before it gets you killed. I knew it couldn't last. Things on the road never do. You're a ghost in other people's lives. You pass through, you leave a faint impression, a memory, and then you're gone, nothing but taillights disappearing into the dark. I learned that the hard way back in my 20s, full of piss and vinegar and thinking I could have a girl in every port. I learned it again. More painfully, when my marriage fell apart in 2014. My ex-wife, Clara, she said living with me was like living with a man who was already a memory. "You're never here, Sam," she'd said during our last big fight, standing in the kitchen of the house I was barely ever in, her voice raw with years of accumulated loneliness. "Even when you're standing right in front of me, you're already gone. Your mind is on the next load, the next state line, the next sunrise over some mountain I'll never see." She was right. I was always half gone. It's a survival mechanism. You can't get attached to a place you're just going to leave in 8 hours. After a while, you can't get attached to people either. With Sarah, though, for those few hours every Wednesday, I felt present. Grounded. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope is a dangerous thing in my line of work. It's a distraction. It's an unsecured load shifting in the back of the trailer. It's what makes you miss the deer darting out of the woods, or the patch of black ice on a mountain pass. Hope makes you take your eyes off the road. And taking your eyes off the road is how you end up dead. One Wednesday in late October, the rhythm broke. The air had a bite to it, the first real hint of fall that makes it down to Texas, a crispness that scrubbed the humidity out of the sky. The sky itself was a high, bright, unforgiving blue. I pulled into the Lone Star, got my key for 112 from Lexi, who gave me a nod, and settled in to wait. The ritual felt different today. Heavier. 2:30 came and went. The cheap clock on the nightstand ticked loudly in the quiet room, each tick an accusation. Then 3 o'clock. The sun started to dip lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the parking lot. My gut started to clench with a feeling I knew too well. It's the same feeling you get when you see a state trooper's lights flare up in your rearview mirror for no reason. The feeling that the other shoe is about to drop from a great height. Something's wrong. This wasn't like her. She was precise. She was punctual. It was part of the thrill for her, the precision of the secret, the tightrope walk. I kept my eyes on the road, watching for that silver Lexus until my eyes burned. Every silver car that passed on the highway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My mind went to Richard. The way she'd flinch sometimes when she mentioned his name. The time she'd shown up with a faint, yellowish bruise on her wrist, blaming it on bumping a filing cabinet at the club, her eyes telling a different story she'd never admit out loud. I felt that old, familiar anger start to burn in my chest. The kind of impotent anger I felt for men who used their strength on people who couldn't fight back. It was a useless anger. I was a truck driver passing through. What could I do? Drive my rig through his front door? It was a nice, cinematic fantasy, but fantasies don't solve anything. They just get people hurt. Just as I was about to give up, to convince myself she just got held up, that I should just get back in my truck and start the long, lonely drive to Kansas City, her car pulled in. She parked in her usual spot, but she didn't get out right away. She just sat there, her silhouette a rigid shape behind the tinted glass. I could feel the tension coming off her car in waves, even from 50 yards away. It was a palpable thing, like heat rising off asphalt. Finally, the door opened. When she walked to my room, her usual quick, secret-keeping pace was gone. She walked like she was wading through water, her feet heavy. Her face was pale, her makeup looking like a fragile mask that was about to crack. The smile she gave me when I opened the door was a ghost of itself, a painful twitch of her lips. "Hey, trucker," she whispered, but her voice was tight and brittle, like a dry leaf. She didn't lean against the door. She just stood in the middle of the room, hugging herself as if a cold wind had followed her inside, though the air from the rattling AC unit was thick and stale. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low and calm. "You learned that on the radio. Panic is contagious. Calm is a tool. It can de-escalate a bad situation at a loading dock or talk a rookie through a tricky backing maneuver." She shook her head, a tiny, jerky movement. "He knows." The two words hung in the air like exhaust fumes in a closed garage. Deadly. Simple and final. He knows? How? My mind raced through a Rolodex of ugly possibilities. A private detective? A friend who saw her? A tracking device on the Lexus? Men like him had resources. I don't know. I don't think he knows about this. About you. He just knows something is wrong. Her voice was thin, reedy. He's been different. For a couple of weeks. Quiet. Watching me. Asking little questions that feel like traps. "Where'd you go today? Who'd you have lunch with?" Then this morning, I was getting in my car, and he came out to the garage. He walked around it, just looking. Then he ran his hand along the fender and looked at the odometer. He said, "You put a lot of miles on this thing for someone who just goes to the grocery store in the club." He said it so calmly, Sam. It was the calmest thing I've ever heard. It was terrifying. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This was it. The end of the line. The part where the real world, with its consequences and its violence, crashes into the fragile fantasy of room 112. The bill for our stolen hours was coming due. "What are you going to do?" I asked, the question feeling stupid and small in the face of her terror. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were swimming with a raw desperation I'd never seen before, not even in the eyes of a driver who's just rolled his rig into a ditch and is watching his career burn on the side of the road. "I want to leave," she said, the words rushing out in a torrent, tumbling over each other. "I can't do it anymore. I can't live in that house, in that life. I've been saving money. Cash. Hiding it for almost a year. It's not much, but it's some. I need to go." She took a step closer, her hands reaching out but not quite touching me, as if she were afraid I'd dissolve. "Take me with you." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular beat that felt like a failing engine. Take her with me. It was the one thing I'd allowed myself to fantasize about during long, empty nights on the highway, the thought of her in the passenger seat, watching the country roll by. And it was the one thing I knew with absolute certainty was impossible. The road is no place for a woman like her. It's not a romantic escape. It's a lonely, dirty, grinding life. It's sleeping in the cab because the only motel for 100 miles has bed bugs and junkies in the parking lot. It's eating roller grill hot dogs for 3 days straight because you're behind schedule and every minute counts. It's the soul-crushing boredom of Nebraska, punctuated by moments of sudden, heart-stopping terror like a tire blowout at 70 miles an hour. It chews people up and spits them out. It had chewed me up, leaving me scarred and wary and preferring my own company. "Sarah," I started, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "My life, it's not a life. It's just driving. It's a cab, a sleeper berth no bigger than a coffin, and 1,000 truck stops that all look and smell the same." "I don't care," she insisted, her voice cracking with the strain, her desperation overriding everything. "Anything is better than this. Just for a little while. Just get me out of Texas. Get me somewhere I can breathe. Please, Sam. I'm asking." Looking at her, at the genuine, primal fear in her eyes, I felt something shift deep inside me. All my rules, all my hard-won knowledge about keeping my distance, about not getting involved, about being the ghost who passes through, it all turned to dust. It felt flimsy and cowardly in the face of her plea. This feeling, it yanked me back 20 years, to a summer up in Montana. I was just a kid then, barely in my 20s, driving a beat-up old Kenworth, hauling lumber out of Missoula. There was a waitress named Ellie at a diner I used to frequent, a place called the Broken Tine. She had that same trapped look in her eyes, a husband who drank too much and managed the local hardware store with an iron fist, and a spirit that was too big for the tiny town she lived in. I keep a folded, worn picture of her in my wallet, tucked behind my commercial license. Her, smiling, squinting into the sun by the edge of Flathead Lake, the water a shocking blue behind her. We had a summer. Just one. A perfect, stolen season. I was young, stupid, full of promises the road would never let me keep. I told her I'd come back for her in the fall. I meant it with every fiber of my being. But a load got rerouted to California, then a family emergency back in Oklahoma, then a blizzard shut down the passes. One thing led to another. The road has a way of doing that, and by the time I made it back up there the next spring, she was gone. Her sister, who was still working at the diner, told me she'd finally left her husband and moved to Seattle. She didn't leave a number. She didn't leave a note for me. I never knew if she was happy or safe. I just knew I'd let her down. The picture is a reminder of that failure. A promise I broke. A ghost I carry. I looked at Sarah, at the hope warring with fear on her face, and I couldn't do it again. I couldn't be the man who drove away. I couldn't leave another woman standing at a window, waiting for a truck that was never coming back. Okay, I said, the word feeling heavy and solid as a block of concrete in my mouth. Okay. Go home. Pack one small bag. Only what you can't live without. Cash, documents, nothing he'll miss right away. Don't act different. Go to your garden club meeting. Go to lunch. Be the woman he expects to see. Don't do anything to make him suspicious. I'll be back here next Wednesday, same time. Be ready. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped her lips, a sound so raw it made my own chest ache. She threw her arms around my neck and held on tight, burying her face in my shoulder. She felt as fragile as a bird. Thank you, she whispered, her warm breath on my skin. Thank you, Sam. When she left, the silver Lexus kicking up a cloud of gravel as it sped out of the lot, the little motel room felt colder and emptier than ever. I had just crossed a line. A definite, irrevocable line. I wasn't a passing ghost anymore. I was an accomplice. And I had a full week to drive to Kansas City and back, a full week to think about the storm I was about to steer my rig directly into. A full week for everything to go wrong. The next 7 days were the longest of my life. The 1,200-mile round trip felt like a journey to the gallows. Every mile I drove, my mind was in Redwood Creek. I played it over and over. What if he followed her? What if he put a tracker on her car? Richard was a man with money and power in his small town. I was just a trucker with a 20-year-old rig and a lonely heart. It wasn't a fair fight. That scar on my jaw throbbed with a phantom ache, a reminder of what happens when you misjudge a man's capacity for violence. I kept thinking about the look in that man's eyes in Laredo right before he swung the bottle. The look of a man who had nothing to lose. I had a feeling Richard had a lot to lose, and that made him even more dangerous. I thought about my brother, Michael. It was a memory I usually kept locked down tight, buried under miles of highway and years of regret, but Sarah's situation had jimmied the lock. He was 2 years younger, always the charismatic one, the one with the easy smile and the bad luck. He was always getting into messes, and I was the one pulling him out. Fights, gambling debts, women who had angry husbands or boyfriends. The last time I saw him, he'd shown up at my apartment in Oklahoma City, looking thin and hunted, with dark circles under his eyes. He'd asked me for money, a lot of it. Said he was in deep with some bad people over a poker game. I was tired. Tired of his messes, tired of being the responsible older brother. I gave him what I could, but I gave him a lecture along with the cash. Told him to grow up, to face his responsibilities. He walked away angry, without saying goodbye. A month later, he was gone. His car found at a bus station in Tulsa. No note, no trace. Just another ghost on my road. I'd been tough when maybe I should have been kind. Maybe this time, with Sarah, I could get it right. Maybe this was a chance to pay a debt my conscience told me I still owed. This time, I wouldn't just give money and a lecture. I'd drive the getaway car. The drive south from Kansas City on I-35 was torture. The load of textiles felt impossibly light, while the weight in my gut was heavier than any load I'd ever hauled. Every highway patrol car I saw made my hands sweat on the wheel. Every black SUV that stayed behind me for more than a couple of miles had me checking my mirrors, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt like I had a flashing neon sign on top of my cab that said accomplice. I felt like a criminal. I stopped for fuel at a Flying J in southern Kansas. The air was buzzing with the usual trucker chatter, guys talking about way stations and dispatchers. It all sounded like it was coming from another planet. I felt separate, isolated by the secret I was carrying. I saw a man in a suit getting out of a nice car, and for a second, my blood ran cold, thinking it was him. It wasn't. But the fear was real. I pulled into the Lone Star and right on schedule, just after 2. The sky was overcast, gray and heavy, threatening rain that never came. It matched my mood perfectly. I felt a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. I walked into the office, the little bell over the door jingling with what sounded like a note of doom. Lexi was behind the counter, reading a thick paperback novel, her blue-streaked hair falling over her face. She looked up. 112, she asked without me saying a word. Yeah, Lexi. 112. She pulled the key from the board and slid it across the counter. She gave me a funny look, her young eyes seeing more than they should. You look tired, Sam, she said. More than usual. Long week, I mumbled, and it was the truest thing I'd ever said. They all are, she said, her eyes dropping back to her book, dismissing me. I went to the room and did my ritual. The soda from the fridge, the plastic chair, the vigil at the window. But this time, I wasn't just waiting for a lover. I was waiting for a fugitive. My heart was a trip hammer against my ribs, so loud I was sure someone in the next room could hear it. 2:30. 3 o'clock. 3:30. Nothing. No silver Lexus. Just the occasional pickup truck rumbling past, the hiss of its air brakes a lonely, mocking sound in the quiet afternoon. My mind started racing, painting ugly pictures. He'd found out. He'd stopped her. He'd hurt her. The image of her, bruised and trapped in that perfect house, made me feel sick with a helpless rage. I was about to stand up, about to do something monumentally stupid like drive into Redwood Creek and try to find her house, a place I didn't even know the address of, when a car pulled slowly into the lot. It wasn't her Lexus. It was a black Cadillac Escalade, gleaming like polished obsidian even under the flat gray sky. It moved slowly, deliberately, with a predator's patience, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. It parked directly in front of the office, taking up 2 spots. The kind of vehicle that costs more than I make in a year. The driver's side door opened. And Richard got out. I'd only ever seen him in the blurry photos on Sarah's phone, standing beside her at some charity event, a proprietary hand on her waist, a plastic smile on his face. He was just as she described, only more imposing in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly coiffed dark hair just starting to go gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that felt predatory. He was wearing an expensive-looking gray suit that seemed completely alien in this setting of gravel and peeling paint. He looked powerful. He looked angry. My blood went cold. This is it. He knows. He followed me here. He's coming for me. I stood up, my body tensing for a fight I couldn't win. My mind flashed to the tire iron I kept in the toolbox on the side of my rig. It was a stupid, suicidal thought, but my hands were already clenching into fists, my knuckles white. I watched him through the grimy window, my breath held tight in my chest. He stood by his Escalade for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the U-shaped row of faded yellow doors as if he were inspecting a property he was considering buying and bulldozing. His eyes seemed to pass right over my room, 112, without a flicker of recognition. Then he started walking. He walked with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned the ground he stood on, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the loose gravel. He walked past my door. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it through the wall. I braced myself for the knock, for the confrontation. He didn't even glance at it. He kept walking. Past 113. And he stopped directly in front of room 114. He raised his hand and knocked. A sharp, impatient rap of knuckles on cheap wood. I stood there, frozen in a state of profound, mind-bending confusion. Room 114? What the hell was in room 114? I'd never seen anyone go in or out of it. It was just another anonymous door. The door opened. A woman stood there. I couldn't see her clearly from my angle, just a silhouette against the dim light of the room. She was younger than Sarah, with long, dark hair. She stepped aside, and Richard walked into the room without a word. The door clicked shut, leaving me staring at a blank yellow door, my reflection a faint, bewildered ghost in the windowpane. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly weak, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and nauseous. My mind was reeling, a high-speed engine that had just thrown a rod, sputtering and screeching as it tried to process what I'd just seen. Richard. Here. At this Roach Motel. But not for me. Not for Sarah. He was here for someone else. The polished chrome of his bumper reflected the cheap, flickering neon of the motel sign, a cruel joke. I watched him get out of that Escalade, his expensive suit a dark stain on the gravel lot. He wasn't looking for my room. He was looking for room 114. My carefully constructed world of danger, of noble rescue, of us against him, it all just shattered into a million pieces. The man Sarah was terrified of, the pillar of the community, the monster in her story, was just another cheating husband, sneaking around in the same cheap, anonymous motel she was. The irony was so thick and bitter I could have choked on it. I felt a sudden, harsh laugh bubble up in my throat. It was a crazy sound. Here I was, ready to play the white knight, ready to charge in and save the damsel in distress from the dragon. And the whole time, the dragon was in the cave next door, committing the exact same sin, probably with the same feelings of guilt and cheap thrill. The righteous anger I'd felt for him, the anger that had fueled me all week, curdled into something else. Pity? Contempt? I didn't know. All I knew was that the simple, black and white story I'd been telling myself was now a messy, complicated, pathetic shade of gray. We were all just sinners here at the Lone Star Inn. About 20 minutes later, just as a sliver of watery sun was finally breaking through the clouds, Sarah's Lexus pulled into the lot. She drove even faster than usual, parking crookedly next to my rig. She jumped out, carrying a small black duffel bag, and practically ran to my door, her eyes wild with a mixture of fear and excitement. I opened it before she could knock. Her face was a mess of tear tracks and frantic energy. "Sam, I'm so sorry, I couldn't get away. He was home all day, just sitting in his study, watching me. I had to wait until he said he had a business dinner." "Sarah, stop," I said, holding up a hand. My voice was flat, hollowed out. All the energy, all the righteous fury, had drained out of me, leaving an empty space. "Just stop. Come in." She stepped inside, dropping her bag on the floor with a thud. It was the sound of a life packed into 20 pounds. "Is something wrong? You look strange." I didn't say anything. I just pointed out the window. "See that black Escalade?" She squinted, her brow furrowed. A flicker of recognition, then horror, crossed her face. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's Richard's car." Her voice went thin with panic, all the air rushing out of her. "Oh my God. He's here. He followed me. He knew." "No," I said, my voice as flat and empty as the plains of West Texas. "He didn't follow you. He was here before you." She stared at me, her mind clearly refusing to connect the dots. Her expression a mask of pure confusion. "What are you talking about?" "He's in room 114, I said, letting the words land like stones. "He's been in there for about half an hour. With a woman." Sarah's face went through a storm of emotions in a few seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. Denial. And then, a slow, dawning horror that was somehow worse than the fear had been. She walked to the window like a sleepwalker and stared at her husband's expensive car parked in the gravel lot of our cheap motel. She didn't say anything for a long, long time. The only sound in the room was the loud, rhythmic rattle of the air conditioner, a mechanical heartbeat counting out the seconds of her shattered life. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible. 114? Yeah. She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. It was the sound of a heart breaking in a new and unexpected way. It wasn't the clean break of betrayal, but the grinding, crushing discovery of shared hypocrisy. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice muffled by her hands. "Who?" I didn't have an answer. I just stood there, feeling like a useless piece of furniture in a tragedy I'd misread from the very beginning. The grand escape plan was dead. The righteous anger was gone. All that was left was this pathetic, ugly, human mess. We weren't heroes and villains. We were just a bunch of sad, cheating people in a sad, broken-down motel. She finally looked up at me, her makeup smeared, the perfect housewife mask completely gone. And in its place was a stranger. Her eyes weren't just sad anymore. They were hard. Calculating. As cold as a winter morning in North Dakota. The storm in them had passed, leaving behind a frozen landscape. "His business," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of emotion, clear as glass. "His oil speculation business is a house of cards, Sam. It's been failing for a year. We're broke. We're beyond broke. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, the cars are leased. This whole life is a lie we've been telling the whole town." I stared at her, the second twist of the knife sinking in deep. It wasn't just about a loveless marriage. It was about a total, catastrophic collapse. The prison she was in wasn't just gilded, it was imaginary. It was made of paper and lies. "He's been borrowing money from anyone who will lend it," she continued, her voice gaining a bitter strength, the strength of someone with nothing left to lose. "Scrambling. Lying. Cheating. I guess this is just part of it." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward room 114. "That woman, that's probably Jessica Thorne. Her father is his biggest competitor, a man named Frank Thorne. Richard once said Frank would rather see him dead than lend him a dime. Looks like Richard found another way to try and get to his wallet." The sheer, grubby desperation of it all hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a story of passion or love or escape. It was a story of finance. A grubby, pathetic transaction in a cheap motel room, just like ours. Only our currency had been loneliness, and theirs was debt. We were all just trading what we had for what we thought we needed. We were all bankrupt in our own way. Sarah slowly, gracefully, stood up. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that was shockingly un-Sarah-like. She looked at the small duffel bag she'd packed, the symbol of her great escape, her new life. She kicked it lightly with the toe of her shoe. "What a fool," she said. It wasn't clear if she meant him, or me, or herself. Maybe all three of us. "So the plan," I started, but I already knew the answer. The fantasy was over. She shook her head, a small, final motion. "There is no plan. There's no way. Not for me. Running away with you was a fantasy, Sam. A beautiful, stupid fantasy for a bored, lonely woman. My reality is in that house, with that man, and the mountain of debt he's buried us under." She walked over to me and put her hands on my chest. She looked up at me, and her stormy eyes were clear now, like the sky after the thunder has passed and moved on down the line. "You know what the worst part is?" she said quietly. "I'm not even angry. I'm just tired. And in a strange way, I'm relieved. I don't have to pretend anymore. Not to him. Not to myself. And not to you." She leaned in and gave me a kiss. It wasn't like the other kisses we'd shared in that room. It wasn't hungry or secret or sad. It was a goodbye. It was final. It was the closing of a ledger, the balancing of an account. "Thank you, Sam," she said. "For room 112. It was the only real place I had." Then she picked up her bag, walked out the door without looking back, got into her Lexus, and drove away. I stood at the window and watched her go until her taillights were just red pinpricks in the distance. Then I kept watching the door to room 114. About 10 minutes later, it opened. Richard came out. He looked rumpled. Defeated. He didn't look like a powerful man anymore. He looked like a guy who'd just lost a bet. He got in his Escalade and drove away in the opposite direction from Sarah. A few moments after that, the woman, Jessica Thorne I assumed, came out. She looked angry, adjusting her dress. She got in a modest sedan I hadn't even noticed and peeled out of the parking lot, spitting gravel. The Lone Star Inn was quiet again. Just me, my rig, and the ghosts of 3 ruined people. The show was over. I checked out. Lexi was still at the counter, her book resting in her lap. She took the key, the plastic diamond feeling cheap and flimsy in my hand. "See you next week, Sam," she asked, not looking up. "No," I said. "Route's changing." It was a lie, but it was the only ending that made sense. She just nodded. She'd seen it all before. Guys like me come and go. Stories start and end. The rooms just get cleaned for the next one. I climbed up into the high cab of my Freightliner. It smelled like diesel and stale coffee and the faint, lingering scent of thousands of miles of road. It smelled like my life. It smelled like home. I fired up the engine, the big Cummins diesel rumbling to life beneath me, a familiar and comforting sound. I pulled out of the lot, not even glancing at the yellow doors of rooms 112 or 114. They were just empty rooms again, waiting for the next set of secrets. I drove all night, pushing west, away from Texas, putting miles between me and that place. The rhythm of the road took over. The hum of the tires on the pavement, the endless stretch of darkness ahead, punctuated by the reflective green eyes of the mile markers. I thought about Sarah and Richard. 2 people trapped in a cage of their own making, chewing at the bars in their own separate, secret ways. I thought about their secrets, and my secrets, and the secrets every driver out here is hauling right along with their cargo. Bills of lading don't list loneliness, or regret, or bad choices. But we haul them anyway. They're the heaviest loads of all. They're the ones that wear you down, mile after painful mile. Out here, you learn that every secret has a weight. And some folks, they carry so many, they get so weighed down they can't even move anymore. All you can do is downshift, hit the Jake brake, and try to haul your own.